13.15 Depression Doldrums and the Independent Treasury. The Panic of 1837 was a symptom of the financial sickness of the times. Its basic cause was rampant speculation, prompted by media of quickism. Gamblers in Western lands were doing a land office business on borrowed capital, much of it in the shaky currency of wildcat banks. The speculative craze spread to canals, roads, railroads, and slaves. But speculation alone did not cause a crash. Jacksonian finance, including the bank war and the specie circular, gave an additional jolt to an already teetering structure. Failures of wheat crops, ravaged by the Hessian fly, deepened the distress. Grain prices were forced so high that mobs in New York City, 3 weeks before Van Buren took the oath, stormed warehouses and broke open flour barrels. The panic really began before Jackson left office, but its full fury burst out Van Buren's bewildered head. So what these two paragraphs are saying is in the first one, it's kind of just discussing about the main causes, or what the Panic of it's describing what the Panic of 1837 was. So our textbook describes it as a financial sickness of the time. So you're looking at in 1837, a time of economic instability. One of the main direct causes you're looking at here is get rich quickism, meaning people are investing a lot of money in terms of land speculation. So investing in land that they think is going to be very profitable, where people are going to move, but of course it fails, right? People are also investing in canals, roads, and railroads, and of course all of these things are not necessarily going so well. However, it wasn't necessarily just a speculation investments, but it was also Andrew Jackson's policies. Of course, one of the things that he did was he moved all of the currency, saying that it needs to be in the form of coinage. So looking at silver, for example. Another issue was, or you're just looking at just the crops, you're getting the Hessian fly, which causing a lot of crops in terms of the wheat. It's so bad to the point where you're getting mobs in New York City that are robbing flour barrels. So all in all, you're getting, of course, the main cause of this is poor investments, but as well as other factors such as poor crops. On the long bill, Americans who fought on credit, confident they could not make their payments later, were caught off guard by the Panic of 1837. Customers like the one shown here found themselves confronted with a long bill that they could not pay, particularly when the banks hold their savings collapsed. So a couple things buying on credit means is that you're paying things in installment, you're borrowing money, and eventually, of course, there's interest that's involved. But the goal is, if you buy something on credit, you'll pay a little bit at a time. But the biggest issue that we're getting here is when you put your money in a bank, you put your savings in that bank. One of the things that the bank also does is they'll take that money and they'll loan it out, right? Unfortunately, as a result of everything collapsing, you people may be unemployed. And as a result of this, if they lose their job, they go to the bank to get their savings. But the unfortunate thing is the bank that may not have that savings anymore because of this economic collapse. And as a result of this, people can't pay their bills, as you could see here. You might see the banker over here going ahead and reading, just letting the individual know about the bill that they need to pay, the long bill, specifically the list of items or things or money that he might have borrowed, but of course his savings is gone and has collapsed. Financial stringency abroad likewise endangered America's economic house of cards. Late in 1836, the failure of two prominent British banks created tremors, and these in turn caused British investors to call in foreign loans. The resulting pinch in the United States, combined with other setbacks, heralded the beginning of the panic. Europe's economic distresses have often become America's distresses, for every major American financial panic has been affected by the condition overseas. So what this paragraph is saying is Americans may have borrowed money from European banks. So as a result of this, they want their foreign loans back. With these two banks collapsing, of course, you're going to tell those American investors or those American bankers, hey, we need our money. And that's going to cause our banking system to collapse as well if they want all their money back. Hardship was acute and widespread. American banks collapsed by the hundreds, including some pet banks, which carried with them several million in government funds. Commodity prices drooped, sales of public lands fell off, and custom revenues tried to revolt. Factories closed their doors, and unemployed workers millied in the streets. So what this paragraph is saying is, as a result of these banks collapsing, including some of these that had government money, so these banks have no money, of course, prices are going to drop um, because prices will drop. I'll explain a little bit later. You're also getting the sale of lands. People aren't buying them because people have no money. And then if people are not buying things, of course, the factories are going to lay off workers and close down, right? Commodity sales are going to go ahead and drop, specifically because if no one's buying items, they have to lower that price. I'm going to skip down here. The Whigs came forward with proposals for active government remedies for the economy's ills. They called for the expansion of bank credit, higher tariffs, and subsidies for internal improvements. But Van Buren, shackled by the Jacksonian philosophy of keeping the government's paws off the economy, spurred all such ideas. So what the Whig Party is saying is, for whatever banks are still in existence, that we need to go ahead and allow them to loan or to borrow more money. Because if people are borrowing money, what they could do is they can make payments. It's going to reinvest back in the economy, right? They're saying higher tariffs, right? If we're going to go ahead and tax imported goods, people are going to buy American goods. That's going to help our business, right? Subsidies for internal improvements. They're saying that the government should go ahead and pay for some of the internal improvements within these states. But of course, Jacksonians are against this. The beleaguered Van Buren tried to apply vintage Jacksonian medicine to the alien economy through his controversial divorce bill, key term. Convinced that some of the financial fever was fed by the injection of federal funds into the private banks, he championed the principle of divorcing the government from banking altogether by establishing so-called independent treasury. The government could lock its surplus money in vaults in several larger cities. Government funds would thus be safe, but they would also be denied to the banking systems as reserves, thereby shriveling available credit resources. So what Van Buren is basically saying is whatever reserve money we have, we're going to put it into vaults in different states, and more importantly, the government will forever stay out of banking. Okay. I actually want to scroll back up to this one. So I'm going to read the Philip Hone, 1750 to 1851. A New York businessman described in his diary in 1837, a phase of the crisis. The savings bank also sustained a grievous run yesterday. They paid 375 depositors $81,000. The press was awful. The hour for closing the bank is 6 o'clock, but they did not get through the paying of those who were in at the time till 9 o'clock. I was there with the other trustees and witnessed the madness of people. Women nearly pressed to death. And the stoutest men could scarcely sustain themselves. But they held on as with a death's grip upon the evidences of their claims, and exhausted as they were with the pressure, they had the strength to cry, "Pay, pay, pay." So what you're getting here is you're getting a lot of people that invested or that deposited their money, their savings in these banks, and they're demanding that the bank give them their money back because they don't trust the bank with these with their finances, right? During this time, if you put your savings in a bank, what the bank is going to go ahead and do is they're going to go ahead and, of course, loan that money out. But they always typically have a reserve during this time where if people wanted their money back, they could pay it back. But with so many people wanting their money back, it became very difficult because of the insufficient amount of funds, right? Okay, I'm going to scroll down to Van Buren's divorce. Van Buren's divorce scheme was highly never popular. His fellow Democrats, many of whom longed for the risky but lush days of the pet bank, supported it only lukewarmly. The Whigs condemned it, primarily because it squelched their hopes for a revived Bank of the United States. After a prolonged struggle, the Independent Treasury Bill passed in 1840. Repealed the next year by the victorious Whigs, the scheme was reenacted by the triumph Democrats in 1846, and then continued until the Republicans instituted a network of national banks during the Civil War. So one of the things, of course, that shows a division between Democrats and Whigs on the decision of Van Buren to go ahead and divorce the federal government from banking, meaning the federal government is not allowed to bank. So before we go on to the next section, gone to Texas, a couple things that we have answered here. What 5 reasons caused the Panic of 1837? So going back, the 5 reasons that you are going to find are all right here within the first 2 paragraphs. They're talking about increase of grain prices. They're talking about the Hessian fly. You're talking about poor speculation, investment of land. Next question that we have is also, what 3 remedies did the Whigs propose, and why did President Van Buren not accept the Whig remedy? And if we go back to that, of course, the Whigs, as stated, are right here, right? Remember, they wanted to go ahead and invest more. They wanted to go ahead and invest more money, right? The federal government, they felt, should take control of this by expanding bank credit, high tariffs, internal improvements, right? Of course, being a Jacksonian, um, the Van Buren believes that the government should completely stay out of the economy, right? Um, what was the divorce bill or independent treasury bill about? Just sum this up, it basically says that, hey, he's sticking with his Jacksonian guns, that the federal government is going to go ahead and stay out of banking, and whatever excess funds that we have or currency, we're going to make sure that we keep it in a reserve in a vault, right? Moving forward, 13.16, gone to Texas. Americans, greedy for land, continue to covet the vast expanse of Texas, which the United States had abandoned to Spain when acquiring Florida in 1819. The Spanish authorities wanted to populate this virtually unpeopled area, but they could carry through their contemplated plans. The Mexicans won their independence in 1821. A new regime in Mexico City thereupon concluded arrangements in 1823 for granting a huge tract of land to Stephen Austin, with the understanding that he would bring into Texas 300 American families. Immigrants were to be established Roman Catholic faith, and upon settlement were to become properly Mexicanized. So what we have in this paragraph, the main idea that you want to understand is, of course, through the Annam-Zonas Treaty, Spain has full authority of Texas. But as a result of the Mexican Revolution, Mexico then goes ahead and obtains this territory. One of the things that Stephen Austin decides to do, right, is he creates, in some ways, he agrees to go ahead and just to bring over. I mean, I don't want to say create a colony, because I don't really think that's the right word to say, but he created arrangements to where he's granted a huge tract of land, and he agreed to bring in, hundreds of American families to help raise the population and develop that land. However, the main idea is that they were forced to be Roman Catholic, right? And they had to become Mexicanized. So there was this cultural aspect out of it. These 2 stipulations were largely ignored. Hardy Texas pioneers, named Americans at heart, resenting the trammels imposed by a foreign government. They were especially annoyed by the presence of Mexican soldiers, many of them whom were ragged ex-convicts. So through this main idea of this paragraph, obviously those Americans that move to Texas, which is Mexican territory, they don't necessarily abide by these rules. Energetic and prolific, Texas Americans numbered about 30,000 by 1835. Most of them were law-abiding, God-fearing people, but some of them had left the states only 1 or 2 jumps ahead of the sheriff. GTT, gone to Texas, became a current descriptive slang. Among the adventurers were Davy Crockett, the famous rifleman, and Jim Bowie, the presumed inventor of the murderous knife that bears his name. Bowie's blade was widely known in the Southwest as a genuine Arkansas toothpick. A distinguished latecomer and leader was an ex-governor of Texas, Sam Houston. His life had been temporarily shattered in 1829 when his bride of a few weeks left him, and he took upon transient residence with Arkansas Indians, whom dubbed him Big Drunk. He subsequently took the pledge of temperance. So a couple things that you want to understand here is that many Texans are moving in, right? And although some are God-fearing people, some of them also were criminals, right? That's what they mean by 2 jumps ahead of the sheriff. So, of course, kind of just foreshadowing this, that the Mexican government is not going to be popular about this. Very good. So this next section is on Sam Houston. After a promising career in Tennessee as a soldier, lawyer, congressman, and governor, Houston became the chief leader and hero of the Texas rebels. Elected to the U.S. Senate and the governorship of Texas, he was forced into retirement when his love for the Union caused him to spur the Confederacy in the Civil War. So he is an important figure. Obviously, Houston is going to be, the city of Houston will be named after him. So going back to the main passage. The pioneer individualists who came to Texas were not easy to push around. Friction rapidly increased between Mexicans and Texans over the issues such as slavery, immigration, and local rights. Slavery was particularly a touchy topic. Mexico emancipated, which means freed, its slaves in 1830 and prohibited the further importation of slaves into Texas, as well as further colonization by troublesome Americans. The Texans refused to honor these decrees. They kept their slaves in bondage, and you American settlers kept bringing more slaves into Texas. When Stephen Austin went into Mexico City in 1833 to negotiate these differences with the Mexican government, the dictator, Santa Anna, clapped him in jail for 8 months. The explosion finally came in 1835 when Santa Anna wiped out all local rights and started to raise an army to suppress the upstart Texans. So the main idea is there's obviously a huge disagreement between the Mexican government as well as Texans. And a lot of this is slavery, immigration, and local rights. What we're getting here is Stephen Austin. Of course, that's where you get the term Austin, Texas. He's not happy with this. And he goes to Mexico City and he tries to negotiate with the government, but he is locked up and jailed. Right. So you're seeing overall this main idea, just tension regarding issues. So if we go back to our questions here, the Mexican government invited who in Texas in 1823, right? You'll find that right in the beginning of that passage that I just read, right? How many Americans were in Texas by 1835? What did gone to Texas mean? And what 3 famous pioneers went into Texas? You're going to find that in the second paragraph. There's a huge number and gone to Texas, right? That's what GTT stands for. And of course, you want to mention the pioneers. They're household names. And one of them being the inventor of the Bowie knife. What 3 issues caused friction between Americans in Texas and the Santa's American government? This number 47 is the most important one because, of course, when you're looking at that last paragraph, when you're getting Stephen Austin, Stone Cold Stephen Austin. Well, that's not really who it is, but Stephen Austin goes to Mexico City to negotiate things such as slavery, immigration, and local rights. By local rights, we mean rights for those people that were Texan, right? So those are the 3 main things that you want to make sure that you understand. Okay. The next video will focus on the Lone Star Rebellion.